was wondering if you'd ever, in that situation, thought, wow, I wish I wasn't here, or this is possibly not worth it, or do you always feel like it's worth it to be there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I tell you why I may have had a flash. I don't usually. I have got very scared a few times, especially when there has been shooting involved and the shooting's directed towards you. But I was terrified at that point. I'll tell you why. Because the three activists that we were with were terrified, and we had spent a lot of time with these guys. And the Syrian activists, possibly the bravest people I've ever met, men, women, children. So they go out thinking that they may not come home again. That's not just to buy bread, but specifically when they go and buy bread, when a town is besieged, as Navai was besieged, that's what happened there. They're shot at by snipers. So never mind when they go to chant freedom, which is when they're targeted. So these are incredibly courageous men. Now they had chosen that safe house, and all the safe houses they choose is quite slick, well-ordered operation actually. And they always choose a safe house because it's got escape routes. And this had two escape routes, which are windows at the back. But what had happened is that we were surrounded and we had armed men outside the windows. Because of course now the Shabiha, the militia, know that this is what the activists are going to do, try and escape from these escape routes. So they're ready to shoot them, and they knew that if they jumped out the window, they'd be killed. So there was no, so they hadn't even thought about hiding places and found the sort of watertight, tiny cupboard. So the moment that I realised they were terrified is when I got really scared, because it was, really unlikely we would get any more than a beating. So they said to us, sit as far away from the door as possible, and it was sheer luck that our safe house wasn't raided, because everywhere else was. So they said to us, sit as far away from the door as possible, hold your passports up, because they're not going to knock and enter, they're going to beat down the door, and we're going to start beating everybody inside. So they're like, start shouting English. And whatever you do, make sure they don't come anywhere near the kitchen. The cupboard where they were hiding was in the kitchen. Now, if they'd have caught them, I don't think we would have heard from them again. They would definitely have been tortured. And that's when I did think, is it worth it, is it worth it? But I'd had so many conversations before I entered Syria about their other people's safety. It's the activist safety that really was paramount importance to us. There's no point going in there if you're going to get people killed. But, there's always a risk. And that's a risk that they weigh up, and that, they live like that every day as fugitives. As a footnote to that clip, over a dozen people were arrested from just our block and next door, and half of them have not been seen since 6 months, and we think they're dead. The other half who were arrested were all tortured. Some of them are still in prison, but half of them are missing. And all those guys that we were with, they're now armed. So, started off really peacefully, but they're now armed and they're part of the Free Syrian Army. And the Free Syrian Army, everybody kind of asks, who are they? What are they? They're just guys like that, which is a guy that owns a computer store, college graduate, and a law student. I rambled a bit, but does that answer your question?
Yeah. I was wondering if I could ask you about the Shabiha.
Sure.
Just the general question as to, are we talking about a group that is operating on orders from somewhere within the Syrian regime? Do they just simply have a loose connection as enforcers and are carrying out these attacks on their own? And the related question is, given what happened in Hula 2 weeks ago, and what happened in Al Kabir yesterday, are we seeing an escalation now from the Shabiha basically carrying out an organized mass killing effectively now, as opposed to simply beatings and intimidation and detention?
Well, what I've heard about the Shabiha, and not much is known. I think there are lots of academic papers about it, but it seems to be a little bit vague. And even when you're in Syria, everybody has their own theories. But generally, it's believed that they're paid thugs. I imagine not too. If I make a comparison, if anybody knows about Iran, like the Basij, you know, like it's like paid Boy Scouts thugs. And certainly you see them. So when I was in towns outside, in the north of Damascus, you'd see them everywhere. And you could, you know, easy to spot. They usually wore all black, just like the Basij in Iran. And you know, they were walking around town, usually big guys with AKs slung across their shoulders. And you know, walking around shopping malls, on motorbikes, and they'd be in packs. Has the violence stepped up? Yes, it has stepped up. But I'll tell you something. What's incredible is all the massacres that are happening that we don't hear about. I get Skype calls through, God, a few months ago, about a month ago, one of my guys in Duma, north of Damascus, he had to get, now Duma was completely surrounded, and it was when we were there, so we had to kind of be smuggled in, smuggled out. He has to get smuggled out because it's far more dangerous now, to basically go to Damascus to find a doctor. I went to 3 secret hospitals or 4 secret hospitals in these towns north of Damascus. 3 of them were raided. Everybody inside was killed. In one of the hospitals, God, I think over 8 patients, wounded people, including children, were shot dead in the hospital beds. So he had desperately, he's a coordinator, this activist. They've all got their own roles. He'd been smuggled to Damascus to try and search for a doctor to take, because they're desperately short of doctors, and doctors are so scared of treating anybody. We spoke to so many doctors, you know, you all know this, who've been arrested simply for travelling outside hours with medical equipment. So what he was telling me about Duma then was, it was being shelled night and day for a week. It wasn't on the news, it wasn't on Twitter, you know, of course the whole of Duma was shut down. Nobody could leave, nobody could come out. No, you know, and I guess there was so much happening in Homs at the time, all the attention was on Homs. Meanwhile, the Shabiha were killing. God, and I would get numbers of the dead just in Duma. So, yes, I think that the violence has increased, but actually, probably not that much, because there's so much going on that we don't know about.